The gallows stood ready in the center of St. Joseph, Missouri, and Samuel Sterling watched from his father's grand office window as the carpenter tested the trapdoor mechanism for what seemed like the 100th time that morning, knowing his decision today would either damn him or save him. Samuel pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his breath fogging the pain in short bursts that matched the frantic rhythm of his heart. Behind him, his father's voice rumbled like distant thunder, each word a command that had shaped Samuel's entire 24 years of existence. "You will marry Alina Pritchard in 3 weeks' time, Samuel. Her father owns half the railroad contracts in this territory, and together we will control trade from here to California. This is not negotiable." Samuel turned slowly, taking in the opulent office that represented everything the Sterling family had built since arriving in Missouri 15 years ago. Rich mahogany furniture, leather-bound books that had never been read, and mounted animal heads that stared with glassy eyes at the wealth their deaths had purchased. His father, Silas Sterling, stood behind an enormous desk carved from a single piece of oak, his silver hair gleaming in the morning light of April 1876. "I do not love Alina," Samuel said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Silas laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. "Love? You sound like one of those romantic fools who pen dime novels for housewives. Love is for people who cannot afford to think with their heads. We are Sterlings. We think with our minds and we act with our wallets." Samuel had heard this speech before, variations of it at least, throughout his childhood and into his adult years. The Sterling fortune had been built on cattle, expanded through banking, and solidified through strategic marriages and business alliances. Samuel's 2 older brothers had married as instructed, producing heirs and expanding the family empire with mechanical precision. His sister had wed a senator's son, creating political connections that reached all the way to Washington. Only Samuel had hesitated, and now his father's patience had run out. "If I refuse," Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer, "then you are no longer my son. You will receive nothing from this family. Not a dollar, not a horse, not even the clothes you are wearing at this moment, because I purchased them. You will leave this house with exactly what you brought into the world, which is to say, nothing at all." The threat hung in the air between them like smoke from a pistol. Samuel thought of his comfortable life, the respect that came with the Sterling name, the security of knowing he would never want for anything material. He thought of Alina Pritchard with her cold eyes and colder heart, a woman who wanted the Sterling name and fortune but cared nothing for the man who came with them. And he thought of Teresa Zimmerman. Teresa worked in her family's general store on the edge of town, where the fine houses gave way to modest homes and hard-working families. Samuel had first seen her 6 months ago when his horse had thrown a shoe nearby, and he had walked the limping animal to the nearest building for help. She had been sweeping the porch, her dark hair caught in a simple braid, her calico dress faded from many washings but spotlessly clean. "Can I help you?" she had asked, and when Samuel met her eyes, something in his chest had shifted like a key turning in a lock he had not known existed. They had talked while her father reshod his horse. Then Samuel had found reasons to return to the store, purchasing items he did not need just for the chance to see her smile, to hear her laugh, to watch the way her hands moved gracefully as she wrapped parcels or measured out flour. He had learned that she was 22 years old, that her family had emigrated from Germany when she was a child, that her father was honest but struggled to compete with the larger merchants in town, and that she read every book she could borrow or buy. He had also fallen completely, irrevocably in love with her. They had met in secret, walking along the river in the early evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Teresa spoke of wanting to see the ocean someday, of her love for her family, of her dreams of having a small farm where she could raise chickens and grow vegetables and live a simple, honest life. Samuel had shared his own dreams, the ones he had never dared speak aloud to his family, of working with his hands, of building something real instead of just managing money, of living a life that meant something beyond the size of his bank account. 3 weeks ago, he had kissed her under a willow tree, and she had kissed him back with a sweetness that had made his soul ache. 2 weeks ago, he had asked her to marry him, and she had said yes with tears streaming down her face. 1 week ago, his father had announced the arrangement with Alina Pritchard. "I need time to think," Samuel said now, straightening his shoulders. "You have until sunset," his father replied, returning his attention to the papers on his desk. "Either you agree to marry Alina Pritchard, or you pack a single bag and leave my home forever. Those are your options, Samuel. Choose wisely." Samuel left the office and walked through the Sterling mansion, seeing it as if for the first time. Every painting, every piece of furniture, every silver candlestick represented a choice someone had made, usually a choice of money over principle, of security over happiness. His footsteps echoed on the marble floors as he climbed the stairs to his room. The room that had been his since the family had built this house was larger than most people's entire homes. He walked to the window and looked out over the manicured gardens, the stables that housed a dozen prize horses, the carriage house, the quarters where the servants lived. Beyond the estate walls, the town of St. Joseph sprawled toward the Missouri River, a bustling frontier city that served as a launching point for settlers heading west. Samuel knew what he had to do. The knowledge sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. He loved Teresa Zimmerman more than he loved comfort, more than he loved security, more than he loved his own family. The choice, when he truly examined it, was not difficult at all. He pulled a canvas bag from his wardrobe and began to pack. He included only the most practical items, things he would need and could justify taking. A change of clothes, his pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather, a few books, some basic toiletries. He removed the expensive suit he wore and dressed in simpler clothes, work trousers and a cotton shirt that he wore when he rode for pleasure rather than business. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Samuel sat at his desk and wrote 3 letters. The first was to his father, explaining his decision and thanking him for his upbringing, despite everything. The second was to his siblings, telling them he loved them and hoped they would understand. The third was to Alina Pritchard, apologizing for any embarrassment his refusal might cause and wishing her well in finding a husband who could give her what she deserved. He left the letters on his bed, shouldered his bag, and walked down the grand staircase one final time. The servants watched him pass with knowing eyes. Samuel realized they had probably heard everything, gossip spreading through the house like wildfire through dry grass. His father's study door remained closed. Samuel did not knock. Outside, the April afternoon sparkled with promise. Samuel walked through the estate gates and did not look back. Each step away from the Sterling mansion felt like shedding a weight he had carried for so long he had forgotten what freedom felt like. He walked through town toward the modest neighborhood where the Zimmerman family store stood, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The store was busy when Samuel arrived, farmers and townspeople moving in and out with their purchases. Through the window, he could see Teresa behind the counter, measuring out sugar for an elderly woman. Her father, Friedrich Zimmerman, stood near the door, greeting customers with his thick German accent and warm smile. Samuel waited outside until the store emptied, then pushed open the door. The bell above jangled, announcing his entrance. Friedrich looked up and his expression shifted, becoming guarded. He knew who Samuel was, knew the sterling reputation, and had made his concerns about Teresa's relationship with Samuel abundantly clear. "Mr. Sterling," Friedrich said carefully, "what can I do for you today?" Teresa emerged from the back room carrying a crate of canned goods. When she saw Samuel, her face lit up like sunrise, then quickly shuddered when she noticed her father's stance. "Mr. Zimmerman," Samuel said, setting down his bag, "I have come to speak with you about Teresa. I know you have concerns about my intentions and I want to address them directly." Friedrich crossed his arms. He was a big man, made strong by years of physical labor, his hands scarred from honest work. "My daughter is not for sale, if that is what you are thinking. We are not interested in being anyone's shameful secret." "Papa," Teresa said softly, but Friedrich held up a hand. "I know how men like you operate," Friedrich continued, his voice rising slightly. "You play with the affections of girls like my Teresa, and then you marry women from your own class and forget us common people ever existed. I will not allow it." Samuel nodded slowly. "You are absolutely right to be concerned, sir. If I were approaching you as a sterling with my family's backing and wealth, I would deserve your distrust. But I am not here as a sterling anymore." Friedrich frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that my father gave me a choice today. Marry the woman he has selected and inherit the family fortune, or choose my own path and be disinherited completely. I have chosen Teresa. I have chosen love. I have given up everything my family owns to be with your daughter if she will still have me, and if you will give us your blessing." The store fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Teresa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide and shining with tears. Friedrich stared at Samuel as if trying to determine whether this was some elaborate trick. "You gave up your inheritance?" Friedrich asked slowly. "The entire sterling fortune. Every penny of it," Samuel confirmed. "I own what is in this bag and nothing more. I have no job, no prospects, and no family support. But I have my health, my willingness to work, and my absolute devotion to your daughter. I know it is not much to offer, Mr. Zimmerman, but it is honest and it is real." Friedrich looked at Teresa, who had tears streaming down her face. "Is this what you want, daughter? A life of struggle and uncertainty? You know we have little money ourselves. We cannot support you both." Teresa wiped her eyes and moved to stand beside Samuel. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I want Samuel, Papa. I do not care about money or fine houses or any of it. I want to build a life with the man I love, even if that means we start with nothing." Friedrich's stern expression cracked, revealing the loving father beneath. He sighed deeply and rubbed his face with both hands. "You are both fools," he said, but there was warmth in his voice. "But you are honest fools, and that is worth something in this world. You have my blessing, though God knows what you will live on." Teresa threw her arms around her father, laughing and crying at the same time. Samuel extended his hand to Friedrich, who gripped it firmly and pulled him into an embrace. "You will work for me in the store," Friedrich said gruffly. "The pay is terrible and the hours are long, but it is honest work. We will make room for you both above the shop until you can afford your own place." "I will work harder than any man you have ever employed," Samuel promised, "and I will spend every day earning the trust you have placed in me." Teresa turned to Samuel, her face radiant despite the tears. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "You have given up so much." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail, the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the small scar on her chin from a childhood fall, the exact curve of her smile. "I have given up nothing that matters," he said. "Everything that matters is standing right here in front of me." They were married 3 days later by the justice of the peace, with Teresa's parents and younger siblings as witnesses. Teresa wore a simple white dress that her mother had sewn, and Samuel wore his only good shirt. They had no money for rings, so they exchanged small tokens instead. Teresa gave Samuel a handkerchief she had embroidered with his initials, and Samuel gave Teresa a smooth river stone he had found during one of their walks, a stone that was shaped like a heart. The ceremony was brief and without fanfare, but when the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel felt richer than he had ever felt in his father's mansion. They moved into 2 small rooms above the general store. The space was cramped and hot in the summer, cold in the winter, with a slanted roof that leaked when it rained hard. Their furniture consisted of a bed that Teresa's father built from scrap lumber, a table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove for cooking and heat. They owned 3 plates, 2 cups, 4 forks, and a single cooking pot. Samuel had never been happier in his entire life. He woke each morning before dawn to help Friedrich open the store, hauling supplies, stocking shelves, and learning the intricacies of running a small business. The work was physically demanding in a way that his previous life had never been. His hands developed calluses, his back ached at the end of long days, and he fell into bed, each night exhausted. But Teresa was there beside him, her head on his shoulder, her hand in his, and that made everything worthwhile. Teresa continued working in the store as well, and in the evenings, while Samuel learned bookkeeping from her father, she began experimenting with making preserves from local fruits. Her mother had taught her the recipes, but Teresa had ideas for improving them, adding spices or combining flavors in unexpected ways. "Taste this," she would say, offering Samuel a spoonful of her latest creation. "Strawberry with a hint of black pepper, peach with lavender, apple with cinnamon and just a touch of maple syrup. It is delicious," Samuel would tell her honestly, because it always was. "You think people would buy these?" Teresa asked one evening about 2 months into their marriage. They were sitting at their small table, eating a simple dinner of bread and stew. The summer heat made the room stifling, but neither of them complained. Samuel considered her question carefully. "I think they would buy them if they knew how good they were," he said. "But most people will not try something new without a reason." Teresa nodded thoughtfully. "What if we offered free samples, just small tastes, enough to show people what they are missing?" Samuel smiled at her enthusiasm. "It is a good idea, but we would need money for supplies to make enough preserves for samples and for selling. We have barely enough for our own food and rent." "Then we save," Teresa said firmly. "We set aside every extra penny until we have enough. It may take time, but we can do this together." So they saved. They ate less, spent nothing on entertainment or extras, and hoarded every spare coin like dragons guarding gold. Teresa continued perfecting her recipes, writing detailed notes about proportions and cooking times. Samuel studied other successful businesses in St. Joseph, trying to understand what made them thrive. One Saturday afternoon, about 4 months after their wedding, Samuel was restocking the dry goods when a well-dressed woman entered the store. He recognized her immediately. Margaret Hawthorne, wife of one of his father's business associates. She had attended parties at the Sterling mansion, had sipped tea in the parlor, had treated the servants with polite disdain. She did not recognize Samuel in his work clothes and apron. "Excuse me," she said imperiously, snapping her fingers at him. "I need these items delivered to my home immediately." Samuel took her list and read through it. Heavy items, awkward to carry, and her home was on the opposite end of town. "We can deliver this Monday morning, madam. Or you can hire a delivery service for immediate transport." "I need it today," Margaret said, her voice rising. "What kind of establishment is this that cannot provide basic services?" Friedrich had stepped out to meet with a supplier. Teresa was in the back preparing an order. Samuel was alone with this woman who had once complimented his father on having such a handsome, well-bred son, never suspecting that same son now stood before her in threadbare work clothes. "Madam, I would be happy to deliver these items personally after the store closes this evening. However, there will be an additional charge for the after-hours service." Margaret's face pinched with annoyance. "Fine. Whatever the cost, I expect it by 7 o'clock. After she left, Samuel loaded her supplies onto a cart and when the store closed, hauled them across town. His back protested the weight, and his arms trembled by the time he reached the Hawthorne mansion. He knocked on the servants' entrance, as was proper for deliveries. A maid answered and directed him to bring the supplies to the kitchen. As Samuel unloaded the cart, he heard familiar voices drifting from the nearby parlor. His heart sank as he recognized his father's distinctive rumble, followed by his mother's lighter tones. "The boy was always weak," Silas Sterling said. "I am well rid of him. He has not even had the decency to come begging for forgiveness." "He married that German shopkeeper's daughter," Samuel's mother added. "Can you imagine? Throwing away everything for a common girl. It is humiliating." "I heard they live in poverty above that pathetic little store," Margaret Hawthorne said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He probably regrets his decision every day but is too proud to admit it." Samuel finished unloading in silence, accepted payment from the maid, and left through the back door. As he pulled the empty cart through the darkening streets, he examined his feelings and found, to his surprise, that he felt no anger or regret. His parents' words, which once would have cut him deeply, now seemed to come from strangers who knew nothing about what actually mattered in life. He arrived home to find Teresa waiting with dinner prepared, the small room warm and welcoming despite its shabby furnishings. She smiled when she saw him, that smile that made his heart expand in his chest, and suddenly Samuel was running across the room, pulling her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you more than anything in this world or the next." Teresa laughed, holding him tightly. "I love you too. What brought this on?" "Nothing," Samuel said, setting her down gently. "Everything. I just needed you to know." That night, as they lay in their narrow bed, Teresa told Samuel she was pregnant. Samuel pulled her close, his hand resting on her still flat belly, and thought about the child who would grow up in this small apartment above a store, who would never know the wealth of the Sterling mansion but would be raised with love and honesty. "We need to make the preserve business work," he said quietly. "We need to provide for our family." "We will," Teresa promised. "Together we can do anything." The next morning, Samuel approached Friedrich with a proposal. They were alone in the store before opening, the quiet interrupted only by the sounds of Teresa and her mother preparing breakfast upstairs. "Sir, I have been thinking about ways to increase the store's profits. Teresa's preserves are exceptional, better than anything I have tasted, including the expensive jams my mother used to import from France. I believe if we market them correctly, we could create a new revenue stream." Friedrich listened carefully, his expression neutral. Since Samuel had joined the family, he had proven himself to be a tireless worker and clever thinker. Friedrich had slowly begun to trust his son-in-law's business instincts, though he remained cautious about large risks. "How much money would we need?" Friedrich asked. Samuel showed him careful calculations he had worked out the night before. "For supplies, bottles, labels, and marketing materials, we would need about $50 to start. I know it is a significant sum." Friedrich whistled low. $50 represented nearly 2 months of the store's profit. That is a lot of money to gamble on fancy preserves. I believe in Teresa's product, Samuel said simply, and I believe in her business mind. She has ideas that could transform this store from barely surviving to truly thriving. Friedrich studied Samuel for a long moment. You have changed, you know. When you first started coming around, I thought you were just another rich boy playing at being common. But you have proven me wrong. You work hard, you treat my daughter with respect and love, and you have a good head on your shoulders. Thank you, sir. Stop calling me sir. You are family. Call me Friedrich. The older man pulled out a lockbox from beneath the counter and counted out $50 in bills and coins. This is everything we have saved for emergencies. I am trusting you and Teresa with our family's security. Do not make me regret it. Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. You will not. I promise you will not. They told Teresa that evening. Her eyes went wide when she saw the money spread out on their little table. This is everything your family has saved, she whispered, touching the bills reverently. What if I fail? What if nobody buys the preserves? Samuel took her hands. You will not fail because I will not let you fail. We will work on this together and we will make it succeed. They spent every spare moment over the next 3 weeks preparing. Teresa cooked batch after batch of preserves, adjusting recipes and perfecting flavors. Samuel designed labels and wrote advertising copy, drawing on his education and his observations of successful marketing campaigns. Friedrich contributed his knowledge of local suppliers and helped negotiate better prices on sugar and jars. Teresa's mother and siblings helped bottle and label the preserves. They created 6 varieties: strawberry pepper, peach lavender, apple cinnamon maple, cherry vanilla, blackberry mint, and plum ginger. Each jar received a handwritten label that read, Zimmerman's Fine Preserves, made with love in St. Joseph, Missouri. On a bright Saturday morning in September 1876, they set up a table outside the store with free samples. Samuel had written and distributed flyers throughout the town, and Teresa arranged the preserved jars in an attractive display with fresh flowers from her mother's garden. The first hour was slow. People walked past, eyeing the display suspiciously. A few stopped to try the samples but moved on without buying. Samuel felt his confidence wavering as the morning stretched on with no sales. Then an older woman stopped, tried the strawberry pepper preserve, and her face transformed with delight. My goodness, she said, this is extraordinary. How much? 25 cents a jar, Teresa said nervously. The woman bought 3 jars. Within minutes, others gathered around the table, drawn by the commotion. They tried samples, exclaimed over the flavors, and began buying jars. By noon, they had sold half their inventory. By evening, everything was gone, and they had a list of people wanting to place orders for more. Samuel counted the money that night with shaking hands. They had made $32 in a single day, more than the store typically made in a week. After accounting for supplies and costs, they had cleared $22 in profit. We need to make more, Teresa said, her eyes bright with excitement and exhaustion. So much more. They reinvested all the profits into supplies and expanded production. Teresa recruited her mother and 2 of her younger sisters to help with the cooking, paying them fair wages. Samuel designed a larger, more professional label and found a printer who could produce them in bulk for a reasonable price. Within 2 months, Zimmerman's Fine Preserves were being sold in 6 stores throughout St. Joseph. Within 4 months, merchants from Kansas City were placing orders. By the time winter arrived, they were shipping preserves to stores in 4 states. Teresa's belly grew round as the business expanded. She directed operations from a chair, her feet propped up, her hands never still as she wrote orders, adjusted recipes, and managed the small army of women now employed in the preserve production. Friedrich expanded the store, using the preserve profits to buy better inventory and hire additional staff. Samuel handled the business side, negotiating contracts and managing distribution. Together, they transformed the struggling little general store into one of the most successful businesses in St. Joseph. Samuel's father heard about the success, of course. St. Joseph was not so large that news did not travel. One cold January morning, Silas Sterling walked into Zimmerman's general store and found his son behind the counter, wearing an apron and helping a customer select fabric. Samuel looked up and felt nothing but mild surprise. The man who had once controlled every aspect of his life now seemed smaller somehow, diminished by his own bitterness. "Father," Samuel said politely after the customer left. "Samuel." Silas looked around the store, taking in the improvements, the busy staff, the well-stocked shelves. "I heard you have been quite successful with some preserve business." "We have been blessed," Samuel agreed carefully. "I have come to make you an offer. Return to the family. Bring this preserve business with you. We can expand it properly. Use sterling resources and connections to make it truly profitable. You can divorce the shopkeeper's daughter and marry a leaner as planned. I will overlook your little rebellion if you come to your senses now." Samuel set down the bolt of fabric he had been holding and looked his father directly in the eyes. "No, no," Silas repeated, as if the word were unfamiliar. "Teresa is my wife, the mother of my unborn child and the love of my life. This business is ours, built on our work and sacrifice. I do not need sterling resources because we are doing just fine without them. And I am happier now, living in 2 rooms above this store, than I ever was in your mansion." Silas's face darkened. "You are a fool. You could have everything, and you choose poverty." "I do not have poverty," Samuel said calmly. "I have love, purpose, and honest work. I have a wife who sees me for who I actually am, not just what name I carry. I have the respect of my community earned through my own efforts. These things have more value than anything you could offer me." "You will regret this," Silas said coldly. "The only thing I regret is not making this choice sooner." Silas Sterling left the store, and Samuel never saw him again. He heard news of his father occasionally. Business deals completed, political connections leveraged, the Sterling Empire continuing to expand through calculated marriages and strategic alliances. Samuel felt no envy or longing for that world. He had everything he needed right here. Teresa gave birth to their first child on a snowy March evening in 1877. Samuel held her hand through the long labor, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and whispering encouragement. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Samuel wept with joy and relief. They named him Jacob, after Teresa's grandfather. He was a healthy, loud baby who demanded attention at all hours. Samuel walked the floor with him at night, singing songs his mother had sung to him when he was very small, songs he had forgotten he remembered. The preserve business continued to grow. They hired a full-time manager to handle production, and Teresa began experimenting with other products: pickles, relishes, canned vegetables. Everything she touched seemed to turn successful. Samuel realized that his wife had a gift for understanding what people wanted before they knew they wanted it themselves. By Jacob's first birthday, they had moved out of the apartment above the store and into a modest house on the edge of town. It was nothing compared to the Sterling mansion, but it had 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a small yard where Teresa could grow vegetables and herbs for her recipes. Samuel stood in the backyard on a warm evening in May 1878, watching Teresa play with Jacob in the grass. The setting sun painted everything golden, And Samuel thought about the choice he had made 2 years earlier, the inheritance he had given up, the life of luxury he had abandoned. He would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Friedrich retired and signed the store over to Samuel and Teresa, moving to a small farmhouse outside of town where he could finally rest after decades of hard work. The store became Zimmerman and Sterling General Store, a name that represented the merging of two families and two approaches to business: Friedrich's honest traditionalism and Samuel's innovative thinking. They expanded again, opening a second store in Kansas City and then a third in Independence. Each store carried the full line of Zimmerman's products, now expanded to include not just preserves, but also pickled vegetables, canned goods, and Teresa's newest venture, prepared spice blends for home cooking. Samuel hired good managers for each store, people he trained personally to uphold the values that he and Teresa had built the business on: fair prices, quality products, and honest dealing. He paid his employees well and treated them with respect, remembering his own experience as a worker rather than an owner. In the spring of 1879, Teresa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Anna. She had Teresa's dark hair and Samuel's blue eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Jacob, now 2 years old, took his role as big brother seriously, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding. The business continued expanding. By 1880, they had 7 stores across Missouri and Kansas, and a distribution network that reached into 12 states. The preserves and canned goods bore labels that read Zimmerman and Sterling, quality you can trust, and those labels were becoming recognized across the country. Samuel found himself, at 28 years old, wealthier than his father had ever been. But the wealth had been earned honestly, built from nothing through hard work, innovation, and the devotion of a woman who believed in him when he had nothing to offer but himself. One afternoon in October 1880, Samuel was working in the office of their main store when a young man entered, hat in hand, looking nervous. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Samuel Sterling?" "I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Thomas, sir. I work for the Sterling family estate. Your father, Silas Sterling, passed away 3 days ago. I have been instructed to deliver this to you." The young man handed Samuel an envelope sealed with the Sterling family crest. Samuel stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal and reading the contents. It was his father's will, or rather, the portion that pertained to Samuel. Silas had left Samuel nothing from the main estate, as expected, but there was a personal letter tucked into the official documents. Samuel unfolded it with trembling fingers and read his father's handwriting, shaky but still recognizable. "Samuel, I am dictating this letter from my deathbed, and I find that impending death makes a man honest in ways he could never manage while healthy. You were right, and I was wrong. I spent my life building an empire of money and connections, and I am dying surrounded by people who respect my fortune but do not love me. You walked away from everything I offered, and you built something better through your own efforts. You married for love, and that love made you richer than I ever managed to be, despite all my calculations and plans. I do not expect your forgiveness, and I do not deserve it. But I want you to know that in my final days, I understand that you were the wisest of all my children. You were the only one brave enough to choose happiness over inheritance. I am proud of you, though I never had the courage to say so while I lived. Your father, Silas Sterling." Samuel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. The words could not undo years of conflict and hurt, but they offered something he had not known he needed: closure and acknowledgement. He shared the letter with Teresa that evening. She held him while he cried, not for the father he had lost, but for the relationship they might have had if Silas had possessed the courage to choose love over pride while he still lived. "He understood in the end," Teresa said softly. "That is worth something." "I suppose it is," Samuel agreed. They attended Silas Sterling's funeral, standing at the back of the church while Samuel's siblings and their spouses sat in the front pews. After the service, Samuel's mother approached him. She looked older than he remembered, her face lined with grief. "Samuel," she said, her voice breaking. "I am sorry for everything. You were right to leave, and we were wrong to try to force you into a life you did not want." Samuel embraced his mother, feeling her small frame shake with sobs. "I forgive you, Mother, and I am sorry for your loss. Will you come to the house? Your brothers and sister want to see you. They want to meet Teresa and the children." Samuel looked at Teresa, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," he said, "we will come." The Sterling mansion looked exactly as Samuel remembered it, grand and imposing but somehow lifeless despite all its opulence. His siblings greeted him warmly, their own children playing in the vast parlor while the adults talked. His brothers admitted that their arranged marriages had been largely unhappy, sustained by duty rather than affection. His sister confessed that she had stayed in a loveless union because she had no other options. "You were the brave one," his older brother Marcus said quietly. "You had the courage to choose differently. I wish I had done the same." As they left the mansion that evening, Samuel held Teresa's hand and watched their children chase each other across the manicured lawn. Jacob and Anna were laughing, their faces bright with innocent joy. They would never know the burden of being Sterling heirs, but they would inherit something far more valuable. Parents who loved each other and loved them, who had built a life and business on principles of honesty and hard work. The business continued growing. By 1882, Zimmerman and Sterling had become a household name across the Midwest, with 15 stores and a mail-order catalog that reached customers as far away as Boston and San Francisco. Samuel hired family members from both sides, employing Teresa's siblings and cousins in various roles, always paying fair wages and sharing profits generously. Teresa gave birth to a third child in 1883, another son they named William. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with serious eyes, unlike his boisterous older brother and energetic sister. Samuel thought William might grow up to be a scholar or perhaps a doctor, someone who observed carefully before acting. In 1884, they built a new house on a hill overlooking St. Joseph. It was large and comfortable, with room for their growing family and frequent guests, but it was built to be a home rather than a showpiece. Teresa filled it with laughter and warmth, with dinner parties for friends and family gatherings that lasted long into the night. Samuel stood in the doorway one evening, watching Teresa teach Anna to bake bread while Jacob helped William stack building blocks in the corner. The kitchen was warm and smelled of yeast and cinnamon, and Samuel felt his heart expand with contentment so profound it almost hurt. Teresa looked up and caught him watching. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking about how different my life might have been if I had made the other choice," Samuel said honestly. "If I had married Alina Pritchard and inherited the Sterling fortune." "Do you regret anything?" Teresa asked, though her eyes showed she already knew the answer. Samuel crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, not caring that her hands were covered in flour. He kissed her forehead, her nose, and her lips. "I regret nothing. You made me richer than my family ever could, not just in money but in all the ways that actually matter. You gave me love, purpose, children, and happiness. The Sterling fortune would have been a prison compared to the life we have built together." "You gave up so much for me," Teresa whispered. I gave up nothing, Samuel corrected gently. I traded something worthless for something priceless. That is not sacrifice. That is wisdom. The children gathered around them, demanding attention and treats. Samuel lifted William while Teresa finished her bread, Jacob hanging on his leg and Anna helping her mother with the practiced ease of a child who had been included in adult work from an early age. By 1885, the business had expanded into manufacturing. They opened a factory dedicated to producing their canned goods and preserves on a larger scale, always maintaining the quality standards that Teresa insisted upon. Samuel implemented revolutionary practices for the time: safe working conditions, reasonable hours, and wages that allowed workers to support their families comfortably. "We will not build wealth on the backs of suffering people," Samuel told his managers. "We will succeed by treating everyone fairly, from our customers to our employees." Some business owners in St. Joseph thought Samuel was too soft, too idealistic. But Samuel noticed that his employees stayed loyal, worked harder, and rarely caused problems. Happy workers were productive workers, and productive workers meant a successful business. In the summer of 1886, Samuel received an invitation to speak at a business conference in Chicago. The organizers wanted him to discuss his success story, how he had built a regional empire from nothing in just 10 years. Samuel was reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but Teresa encouraged him. "Your story can inspire others," she said. "People need to hear that there are different paths to success, that you can build wealth without sacrificing your principles or your happiness." So Samuel went to Chicago, leaving Teresa to manage the business. He spoke to a room full of businessmen about choosing love over inheritance, about building a company based on quality and fairness, about how his wife's talents and his willingness to work hard had created something neither of them could have achieved alone. The audience was skeptical at first. These were practical men who dealt in numbers and contracts, not romantic notions of love conquering all. But as Samuel detailed their strategies, their innovations, and their financial success, the skepticism faded. By the end of his speech, he received a standing ovation. Afterward, a dozen men approached him with questions and opportunities. They wanted to invest in Zimmerman and Sterling, to open stores in their cities, to partner on ventures. Samuel listened politely, but declined most offers. He and Teresa had built something special, something that could easily be corrupted by expanding too fast or accepting partners who did not share their values. However, one man caught his attention: a young entrepreneur named David Chen who had emigrated from China and was struggling to establish himself despite having excellent business ideas. Samuel saw something of himself in David's determination and offered to mentor him, teaching him the lessons Samuel had learned about honest business practices and strategic growth. Samuel returned to St. Joseph with renewed energy and vision. He told Teresa about his speech, about the response, about the young men who had approached him seeking advice. "We should start a lending program," Teresa said thoughtfully. "Small loans to help people like David start their own businesses. We can afford it now, and think of how many families could improve their situations with just a little help." Samuel loved that about his wife. She never forgot where they had come from, never lost her empathy for people struggling to make a better life. They established the Zimmerman and Sterling Business Fund, offering small loans at fair interest rates to entrepreneurs who had good ideas but no capital. Over the next few years, they helped dozens of people start businesses: a Mexican family who wanted to open a restaurant, a widow who dreamed of running a boarding house, a freed slave who had learned carpentry and wanted his own shop. Not all the ventures succeeded, but enough did that the program became self-sustaining. Their own children grew up watching their parents work together, seeing how Samuel and Teresa made decisions jointly, respected each other's opinions, and built something meaningful beyond just accumulating wealth. Jacob announced at age 12 that he wanted to be a businessman like his father. Anna declared she wanted to invent new recipes like her mother. William said he wanted to be a doctor, and his parents supported that dream with the same enthusiasm they showed for the others. In 1890, Samuel turned 38 years old. He and Teresa had been married for 14 years. Years that had transformed them both from young dreamers into established, respected members of their community. Zimmerman and Sterling now operated 23 stores, employed over 200 people directly and hundreds more indirectly through their supply chains, and generated an annual revenue that exceeded the Sterling family fortune at its peak. But Samuel measured his wealth differently now. He counted it in Teresa's laughter, in his children's happiness, in the satisfaction of building something honest and good. He counted it in the gratitude of employees who could afford to feed their families, in the success stories of people they had helped through their lending program, in the knowledge that he had stayed true to himself, even when it cost him everything he had known. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Teresa rested her head on Samuel's shoulder. "You ever wonder what our lives would have been like if your father had not given you that ultimatum?" she asked. Samuel considered the question. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different, but I believe we were meant to be together. The ultimatum just forced me to be honest about what I really wanted." "I am grateful for that honesty," Teresa said softly. "You gave up so much for me. How many times do I have to tell you?" Samuel laughed, pulling her closer. "I gave up nothing of value. I traded a gilded cage for freedom. I traded obligation for love. I traded an inheritance I did not earn for wealth we built together. Those are not sacrifices. Those are blessings." Teresa smiled and kissed him. "I love you, Samuel Sterling. And I love you, Teresa Sterling, now and always." Their story became somewhat legendary in St. Joseph and the surrounding areas. Parents told their children about the wealthy young man who had given up everything for love and had built something better through honest work and devotion. Struggling couples took comfort in knowing that starting with nothing did not mean staying with nothing, that love and partnership could overcome material challenges. As the years passed, Samuel occasionally encountered people from his old life. Some had prospered through their calculated marriages and business arrangements. Others had withered in loveless unions, their wealth providing no comfort against loneliness and regret. None of them, Samuel noticed, seemed as genuinely happy as he was. His siblings visited regularly, their children playing with Samuel's children, forming bonds that the previous generation had never managed. Marcus eventually divorced his wife, shocking St. Joseph's society, but finally choosing his own happiness over appearances. Samuel's sister helped her children when they fell in love with unsuitable partners, encouraging them to follow their hearts rather than social expectations. The Sterling name, once synonymous with cold business calculation, gradually became associated with Samuel's branch of the family: fair dealing, quality products, and genuine care for the community. In 1895, Samuel and Teresa celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. They had 4 children now, a thriving business empire, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had built it all together on a foundation of love and mutual respect. Their oldest, Jacob, was 17 and already showing remarkable business acumen. Anna was 15 and had begun creating her own product line of specialty baked goods. William was 12 and reading medical texts with single-minded dedication. Their youngest daughter, Sarah, born in 1889, was 6 years old and announced regularly that she was going to be president someday. Samuel would not have bet against her. They threw a party for their anniversary, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. Friedrich and his wife, now elderly but still sharp, Teresa's siblings and their families, employees both past and present, the entrepreneurs they had helped through their lending program, friends from all walks of life. The house overflowed with laughter and music, and the warmth of genuine community. Late in the evening, after most guests had gone home, Samuel found himself in the same kitchen where he had once stood and watched Teresa make bread. The house was quiet now, children asleep upstairs, Teresa bidding farewell to the last departing guests. He thought about the boy he had been at 24, standing in his father's office and facing an impossible choice. He thought about how terrified he had been to walk away from everything he had known, how uncertain the future had seemed, how his hands had shaken as he packed that single bag. If he could go back and speak to that younger Samuel, he would tell him not to be afraid. He would tell him that the decision he was about to make was the best decision of his life. He would tell him that Teresa Zimmerman would not just be his wife but his partner, his inspiration, his best friend, and the mother of his children. He would tell him that together they would build an empire more valuable than anything his father had ever dreamed of, because it would be built on love rather than calculation. Teresa joined him in the kitchen, slipping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Samuel said, turning to face her. "I am thinking about how one choice, one moment of courage led to this entire life. I am thinking about how you took a boy with nothing but the clothes on his back and helped him become the man I always wanted to be." "We did that together," Teresa corrected gently. "I could not have built this without you, just as you could not have built it without me. We are partners, always." "Partners," Samuel agreed, kissing her softly. "In business and in life." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, two people who had chosen love over convenience, courage over comfort, and had been rewarded with a life richer than any inheritance could provide. The business continued growing as their children grew. Jacob joined the company officially at 18, bringing fresh ideas and youthful energy. Anna opened a bakery that quickly became famous for its innovative pastries and cakes. William was accepted to medical school, his tuition paid from the family business profits. Sarah announced she was going to law school someday, shocking everyone because law school did not typically accept women, but Samuel just smiled and told her if anyone could do it, she could. By 1900, Samuel was 48 years old and could look back on 24 years of marriage and 24 years of business success. Zimmerman and Sterling had become one of the largest food producers and retailers in the Midwest, with operations in 8 states and distribution across the country. Their products were known for consistent quality and fair pricing, their stores for honest dealing and good customer service. More importantly, Samuel could look back on 24 years of happiness, of waking up each morning next to the woman he loved, of building a life that mattered beyond just accumulating wealth, of raising children who understood that privilege came with responsibility, and that success was measured in more than dollars. He had given up an inheritance to marry for love, and that love had made him richer than his family ever could have dreamed. Not just richer in money, though that had come too, but richer in all the ways that actually mattered. Richer in love, in purpose, in contentment, in the knowledge that he had lived authentically and built something good. Sometimes, late at night, Samuel would hold Teresa close and marvel at how a single choice had transformed his entire existence. One moment of courage in his father's office had led to everything that followed. The wedding with a river stone instead of a ring, the cramped apartment above the store, the first successful batch of preserves, the expansion and growth, the children and grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. "Do you ever regret it?" Teresa asked one night, echoing the question she had asked so many times over the years. And Samuel gave the same answer he always gave, the one that was truer with each passing year. "Never. Not for a single moment." "You are my greatest treasure, Teresa, and our life together is worth more than all the gold in California." As they grew older together, their love deepened rather than fading. They developed the comfortable intimacy of long partnership, finishing each other's sentences and knowing what the other needed before words were spoken. They worked together daily, still making major business decisions jointly, still respecting each other's opinions and expertise. Their children married and had children of their own. Jacob married a teacher and had 3 children. Anna married a fellow baker and had 2. William married a nurse and had 4. Sarah, true to her word, was accepted to law school in 1905 and became one of the first female lawyers in Missouri, though she married later and had 1 child. Samuel and Teresa became grandparents, then great-grandparents as the years rolled forward. They stepped back from daily business operations, leaving management to Jacob and his children, but they remained involved and interested. The business continued to thrive under the second and third generations, still adhering to the principles Samuel and Teresa had established. In 1910, at the age of 58, Samuel stood in the garden of their home with Teresa by his side. They were celebrating their 34th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The yard was filled with laughter and joy, 3 generations of family who existed because 2 young people had been brave enough to choose love over security. "Look at what we built," Teresa said softly, gazing at their assembled family. "Look at what you built," Samuel corrected. "None of this would exist without you. Your courage, your vision, your love. You took a foolish boy who gave up his inheritance and turned him into a successful man. You took nothing and made it into everything." "We did it together," Teresa insisted, as she always did. "Everything we have accomplished, we accomplished as partners." Samuel could not argue with that. Everything good in his life had come from their partnership, from that first decision to choose love over inheritance. From every subsequent decision they had made together over 34 years of marriage. As the sun set over their garden, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Samuel reflected on the path his life had taken. He had walked away from the Sterling mansion with nothing but the clothes on his back and faith in a future with the woman he loved. He had worked harder than he had ever worked in his life, had faced uncertainty and struggle, had built a business from the ground up through sheer determination and Teresa's brilliance, and he would not change a single moment of it. The inherited fortune he had given up was gone now, divided among his siblings and their children. The Sterling mansion had been sold. The family name, once powerful in St. Joseph, had faded as his siblings passed away and their children moved to other cities, other states. But the names Zimmerman and Sterling lived on, emblazoned on stores and products, associated with quality and fairness and honest dealing. The legacy Samuel and Teresa had built together would continue for generations, not because they had inherited wealth, but because they had created something of lasting value through their own efforts. As darkness fell and the party finally ended, Samuel and Teresa returned to their now quiet house. They climbed the stairs slowly, their joints creaking in protest but their spirits undimmed. In their bedroom, Teresa sat at her vanity and began taking down her hair, still thick but now completely white. Samuel watched her, this woman who had been his partner for 34 years, and felt the same surge of love he had felt the first time he saw her sweeping the porch of her father's store. Age had changed them both physically, but it had not changed the essential truth of what they meant to each other. "What are you looking at?" Teresa asked, catching his eye in the mirror. "The most beautiful woman in the world," Samuel said simply. Teresa laughed, the sound warm and rich. "You are a romantic fool," Samuel Sterling. "I am your romantic fool," Samuel corrected, moving to stand behind her and placing his hands on her shoulders. "And I will be until my last breath." They climbed into bed together, as they had done thousands of times before. Teresa rested her head on Samuel's chest, his arm around her shoulders, their fingers intertwined. Outside, the Missouri night sang with crickets and distant sounds of the growing city. "Thank you," Samuel whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Teresa asked sleepily. "For choosing me. For believing in me when I had nothing to offer but myself. For building this beautiful life with me. For making me richer than my family ever could." Teresa lifted her head and kissed him softly. "You gave up everything for me." "No," Samuel said firmly, pulling her close. "I gave up nothing that mattered, and I gained everything that does. That is the truth, Teresa, and it will be the truth for the rest of our lives." They fell asleep in each other's arms, two people who had bet everything on love and won more than they had ever dreamed possible. Years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and anniversaries, by business successes and family gatherings, by the small joys and occasional sorrows that make up a life fully lived. Samuel and Teresa faced the challenges of aging together, supporting each other through illnesses and losses, celebrating each victory and milestone. In 1920, they celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary. Samuel was 68 years old, Teresa was 66, and they were surrounded by a family that had grown beyond anything they could have imagined on their wedding day. 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The business they had started with $50, and a dream now generated millions in annual revenue, and employed thousands of people across 15 states. But more important than the numbers was the culture they had created, a business built on principles of fairness and quality that had stood the test of time. "We did well," Teresa said that evening as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done so many times before. "We did better than well," Samuel replied, taking her hand. "We built something that matters, not just a business but a family, a legacy, a proof that love and hard work can triumph over any obstacle." Teresa squeezed his hand. "I am tired, Samuel, not unhappy, just tired." Samuel understood what she meant. They had lived full lives, accomplished more than most people dared to dream, and now the weight of years was beginning to press upon them both. "Then we will rest together," he said softly, "as we have done everything else." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had chosen love over inheritance and had spent 4 decades proving that choice correct. Whatever time they had left, they would face it together, as partners, as lovers, as two souls who had found in each other everything worth having. Teresa passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm June night in 1922. Her hand clasped in Samuel's as it had been for 46 years of marriage. Samuel held her one last time, whispering his love into her unhearing ear, grateful beyond words for every moment they had shared. He lived 2 more years without her, surrounded by the family they had created and the business they had built, but he was never quite whole again. Samuel Sterling died in his sleep on a spring morning in 1924, just weeks before what would have been his and Teresa's 48th wedding anniversary. They were buried side by side in the cemetery overlooking St. Joseph, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, Samuel Sterling and Teresa Zimmerman Sterling, partners in life, in love, and in legacy. They gave up everything for each other and gained more than kingdoms. Their children inherited the business and continued running it according to the principles their parents had established. The Zimmerman and Sterling Company prospered for generations, always known for quality products and fair dealing, a lasting testament to what two people could build when they chose love over convenience. And in St. Joseph, Missouri, parents still told their children the story of Samuel Sterling, the wealthy young man who gave up his inheritance to marry for love, and Teresa Zimmerman, the shop girl who made him richer than his family ever could, not through calculation or strategy, but through partnership, devotion, and the courage to build something meaningful together. It was a love story for the ages, proof that the best inheritance is not the one you receive but the one you create, that true wealth is measured not in gold but in love, and that the bravest choice is always to follow your heart, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. In the end, Samuel Sterling had been right. He had given up nothing of value and gained everything that mattered, and that truth echoed through generations, inspiring countless others to choose love over security, courage over comfort, and partnership over inheritance. Their story became more than just a tale of business success. It became a reminder that the greatest fortunes are built not in counting houses or investment banks, but in the quiet moments of connection between two people who see each other truly, who build together rather than alone, who understand that wealth without love is just a different kind of poverty. The Zimmerman and Sterling legacy lived on, not just in the stores that bore their names or the products that carried their reputation, but in the lives they had touched, the family they had created, and the proof they had offered that a life built on love would always be richer than one built on obligation. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Samuel and Teresa Sterling were together still, partners for eternity, their love story complete and perfect, a testament to the power of choosing with your heart rather than your head, of believing that love can indeed conquer all obstacles if you are brave enough to let it.